Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm Katie Halper.
And I'm Mate Aaron. And the reason I'm saying it that way is because I'm in Hungary for the first time, visiting the place of my father's birth. And here, I learned while being here, I can't believe I didn't know this, my first time here. That's how you say your name. You say the last name first. So I'm Mate Aaron.
I'm Halper Katie.
Yeah. It's just been funny. Like, I'm here with my dad and my siblings. And so when we're walking around and if my dad gets recognized, people will go up to him and say, Mate Gab, or Mate Gab, or, you know, and look, being in one's actual homeland, it's a powerful thing to be here for the first time, to see, you know, went to my dad's childhood home, went to the glass house where he took refuge as an infant with with my grandmother, his mother, to survive the Nazi Holocaust. This is a place of refuge for Hungarian Jews, where hundreds of people were packed into an old glass factory, living in conditions the way it was described, sounding exactly like people in Gaza right now who are going through their own Holocaust. And, you know, the emotion one feels in being in your, you know, motherland is what, you know, Israel tries to do to Jews from around the world when they come to Israel. But it's fake, because most Jews are not actually from the land of Palestine. They're from places like where I'm visiting right now. And so I just want to encourage everyone to go visit their actual motherland, not a fake one, if you can.
Yeah, so a lot of people who are calling Israel their motherland, just go back to Long Island.
Yeah, or Ukraine or Poland. Yeah. I mean, that's originally where my family was probably from before they even came to Hungary. But you know, since this is where my dad is from, this is where I am, and it's a beautiful experience.
And Aaron, I'm very impressed because while you were in Hungary, you were hungry for an exchange on the Piers Morgan show, and as usual, you did a great job.
Yeah, you could say I was hungry for attention.
So yeah, I didn't want to say that. Yeah.
So anyway, here's a clip of my appearance.
Well, this war stuff's not really working. I'm not a pro-war guy.
Can I make a point here? The reason to oppose war is not because it doesn't work. It's because you have no right to do it. You had no right as an illegal aggressor to invade Iraq. That was based on a lie, and the U.S. had no right to bomb it. Just as Israel has no right to bomb Iran, which is not threatening Israel, Israel has no right to occupy the people of Palestine. It only has the obligation to stop occupying them. And on that point, I've been to Gaza. I'm Jewish myself. I was treated very well. I met children. They're not taught to hate. They're just taught to have their eyes open and see what's in front of them.
What rock are you living on?
Israeli occupation that has denied them their basic rights. It's put them in a cage. If you don't want Hamas there, don't put them under one of the most sadistic military occupations in the world, in which Israel controls even what kind of food people can eat, which now has been reduced to Holocaust levels. You know, 20 years ago, that was at the levels where Israel was counting the calories, literally, so that they would give the people of Gaza just enough food so there wouldn't be a full-blown starvation crisis. One Israeli official referred to this as putting them on a diet. That's called sadism, and it's the root cause of all problems in the Middle East. If you don't want wars, if you don't want conflict, the first place to start is with our aggression, our tyranny. And the fundamental tyranny that threatens everybody is Israel's oppression and now mass murder of the Palestinian people.
Well done, Aaron.
Thanks. You know, I mean, it started off as just a response, because I'm tired of hearing saying, oh, regime change doesn't work, right? So if it did work, we could do it. No, what right do we have to regime change? Does someone else have the right to regime change us? So that's what I wanted to address. And then I also addressed other points that were made. But notice how the other guest, she scoffs when I'm talking about
what planet
the children of Gaza aren't I mean, you know, to channel Douglas Murray, if you haven't been somewhere, right, then how do you know that children in Gaza are taught to hate? They're just taught to love their people. And because Zionists hate the Palestinian people, can't accept their right to exist, they can't accept that the people of Gaza just might be normal people who just want to live in dignity.
Right. So Aaron, they didn't try to throw you out a window?
No, there were no, I was only treated with just such humbling kindness the one time I got to go to Gaza.
Yeah. Totally right. Morally speaking, it's not about whether or not it works. I think that I kind of believe in the idea of different people having different roles. So I think that there is a real strong moral case against regime change. I think that there are other people who aren't as moral in their outlook and are more realpolitik people. And for those people, it works to say it doesn't work. But I agree with you. I mean, that's the primary thing about this. It happens to not work, but it's also wrong.
All right, well, let's get to our 4 basic food groups. What do we have for Democrats?
Okay, so for Democrats suck, let's turn now to Democrat Representative Ro Khanna of California, and not because he's sucking, actually, quite the contrary. He is one of the few Democrats actually taking a stand against the burgeoning U.S. war with Iran, but he calls out some of the Democrats who are sucking. And those include people who occupy leadership, who are silent on the war or even supporting it, like Schumer. So let's hear what Khanna had to say during an interview with Caitlin Collins on CNN.
Senator Schumer, the leader of the Democrats over in the Senate, from what I've seen so far, has not committed to voting for a similar resolution to yours that is being floated around the Senate. He said today to NBC that Congress would not hesitate to exercise its authority if needed. What do you make of that position?
It was very disappointing. His statement made no sense. One of the things we need to do as a Democratic Party is speak plainly, and this party should stand up against Donald Trump going and invading Iran. Frankly, Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and people on the right have been stronger voices than Senator Schumer. Now, he's the one who cheerled us into the war in Iraq, so he doesn't have much credibility on these issues. And I would like the Democratic leadership to support Bernie Sanders and Tim Kaine and say we are not going into Iran and in the House for us to have this vote with Massie and me. The American people are sick of this. It's one of the reasons Donald Trump won, when he called out Jeb Bush and he said to Jeb Bush, you're not willing to say the Iraq war is a mistake. This is an opportunity for the Democratic Party to be the anti-war party again.
So are you saying that you're in agreement with Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, and Marjorie Taylor Greene?
On this issue, absolutely. I mean, they are talking to ordinary Americans who are saying, you know, let's build our industry here. Let's pour our money here. We spent 10% of the federal debt, $36 trillion, is because of the Iraq war. It was the biggest foreign policy blunder of the 21st century. It set America back in so many ways. And you've got young people wondering, are they going to be called up to serve in a war against Iran? None of the ordinary Americans want this, and they certainly want Congress to speak out. And I think this is not a partisan issue. This is an issue of, are you for peace abroad and building jobs at home, or are you for more overseas interventions? And the one thing I can tell you is the American people want Congress to have a vote on this.
Okay, so a couple of things to say. One is I co-sign everything that Ro Khanna just said. And when Caitlin Collins says, "Oh, you agree with Tucker," it's so disingenuous, and she's trying to like discredit Khanna by saying you agree with these people on the right and not with Schumer. But
it's cooties journalism. Like,
yes,
you're with the person who has cooties. Like Tucker has cooties, so you know how can you be with the guy who has cooties? It's like it's
exactly.
not serious.
It's like an ick factor.
It's based on personality, not substance.
Yeah, and it's guilt by association. And of course, people love to frame it that way. Whereas the truth is, why are you letting people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson outflank you in the anti-war position, bad Democrats? Like, that's the point. It's not that this position is bad because Tucker Carlson supports it. It's that you are bad Democrats who don't support this position that even Tucker Carlson gets. But, just in case people wanted to see a really cringe example of how bad Chuck Schumer is on Iran, let's take a look at this video that I guess he thought was a good idea, where he's making fun of Trump for his Iran position.
When it comes to negotiating with the terrorist government of Iran, Trump's all over the lot. One day he sounds tough, the next day he's backing off. And now, all of a sudden, we find out that Witkoff and Rubio are negotiating a secret side deal with Iran. What kind of bull is this? They're going to sound tough in public and then have a side deal that lets Iran get away with everything? That's outrageous. We need to make that side deal public. Any side deal should be before Congress and, most importantly, the American people. If Taco Trump is already folding, the American public should know about it. No side deals.
Okay, so that's from June 2nd. Obviously, Trump has not really been up for negotiating, although who knows, because he has, Pete Hegseth likes to say, has strategic unpredictability. But there you have Chuck Schumer warmongering and trying to portray Trump as too soft on Iran because he's a warmonger who wants to, I guess, bring us to potential World War III.
Yeah, and the amazing thing is he thinks he's going to convince anybody. Like, he thinks Americans are going to go to the streets like, no more side deals. Because what? Because, like, we want war with Iran? Because that's basically what he's saying, and he's getting it now. I have to say, I feel so bad. Whoever has to be on Chuck Schumer's media team and film that, and of course, there's multiple takes.
Yes.
So you can imagine having to hear Chuck Schumer like rehearse his taco Trump line, like from like in support of war with Iran multiple times. That's just got to be so insufferable. So, it's hard for me to feel empathy if you're, on Chuck Schumer's team. But even if you have to film him practicing his warmongering, his just awkward and unconvincing and just lame warmongering over and over, that's got to be a tough job. So
yeah, it really does. Yeah,
I
like the way that. What? That's bull. What bull?
But speaking of bull, and going back to what I was saying before about how these critiques still presume the legitimacy of the crime. Ro Khanna calls the Iraq War a blunder. Like a blunder is when you're like, oops, like I dropped this on my foot. What a blunder! Or like I booked a reservation on the wrong date, like at a restaurant. What a blunder! Like that's a blunder. Invading Iraq is a crime. It's one of the worst crimes of the century. And even a critic like Ro Khanna can't bring himself to say it's a crime. Maybe one day we'll get there. And I know if he says that, he gets heat on him, and he's a politician. He's got to like build a big coalition. But it'd be great to have one politician who can speak the truth about a basic thing like how invading a sovereign country is a crime. It's a total crime. I mean, he wouldn't hesitate to call Russia's invasion of Ukraine a crime. He should apply the same standards to his own country, I think.
Yeah. Well, you're almost shoehorning that row into a sucking. You're trying to double my Democrat suck for the week?
Well, yeah. I mean, in some ways I am. But listen, I'm going to balance that critique of Ro Khanna with a critique of the Republicans, who he spoke about favorably, because he mentioned people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson. They're coming out strongly against a U.S. attack on Iran, on top of its existent involvement with Israel, because Trump is now wing bombing. But when you look at concrete measures, what are the anti-war Republicans doing to challenge Trump on this, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's made some great statements saying we have to focus on our issues here at home. People want affordable health care. She's sounding like a progressive on that point. And like, we don't want war with Iran. We don't want to go to war on behalf of a foreign country. Marjorie Taylor Greene, great. Sounds great. But what are you doing about it? Well, as we're broadcasting this, nothing, because Thomas Massie, who is a Republican, to his credit, he put out a measure to call for a war powers vote on the U.S. getting involved in Iran. And he hasn't attracted one Republican co-sponsor. This is Michael Tracy. 0 Republican co-sponsors on Thomas Massie's war powers resolution. So, I mean, where's Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's been saying we don't want to go to war? I mean, if anything, she should be signing on here to this, but she won't, because Republicans, no matter what they could say on social media, have a hard time challenging Trump when it comes to actual policy.
I don't know what she's doing. Tweeting instead of voting. That's unfortunate.
Well, speaking of tweeting, as a bonus Republican suck, let's look at something that Trump put out there. Trump put out a lot of offensive, unhinged, dangerous statements this week. So it's impossible to just pick one. But I picked what I think is just one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen any leader ever do, with Trump posting this message that he got from his Israel ambassador, Mike Huckabee. Mike Huckabee says, "You have many voices speaking to you, sir, but there is only one voice that matters, his voice. I am your appointed servant in this land and am available for you, but I do not try to get in your presence often because I trust your instincts. No president in my lifetime has been in a position like yours, not since Truman in 1945. I don't reach out to persuade you, only to encourage you. I believe you will hear from heaven, and that voice is far more important than mine or anyone else's." Okay? So that is Trump's ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, telling Trump a few things. First of all, that basically he's been chosen by God to meet this moment, okay? And only his voice matters. So first of all, just stopping right there, like, what is the common claim that the U.S. and Israel make about Iran constantly, that they're like an apocalyptic theocratic regime? Okay. Right. Well, it sounds to me like if you believe that you're like not driven by policy, but by God, that sounds like pretty theocratic to me. And in this case, you're a regime that's the most powerful one in the world, which sounds a lot scarier than whatever Iran can do, given that Iran doesn't even have nuclear weapons and doesn't want them, whereas the U.S. does. And the other major thing that Mike Huckabee says there is when he invokes Harry Truman in 1945. What did Harry Truman do in 1945? he dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it sounds like Mike Huckabee is telling Trump that through God, you should do the same thing. And by the way, there's reporting saying that if Trump wants to achieve his goal of blowing up that Iranian nuclear facility that's buried deep in a mountain, the only way to do that is with a tactical nuclear weapon. So, I mean, this is just insane stuff. We are in an end times moment led by end times people like Mike Huckabee, and the gall of them to call Iran a theocratic regime when they are hands down, along with Israel, the most dangerous theocratic regime in the world.
Yeah, it really is insane, the projection, the framing of the U.S. as this bastion of liberty, the same thing with Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East, when really the only difference between the U.S. and Israel and other theocratic nations is that the U.S. and Israel pretend they're not that, while other theocratic nations own it. So for Isn't That Weird, let's go to Fox News' Trey Yingst. He's not weird. You'll see what's weird. It's a response to him. He's reporting from Israel, and he's actually had some empathy for Palestinian journalists, way more than his counterparts in some liberal mainstream media circles, and he's been criticized for that before. But let's take a look at what he said that got Betar, the right-wing fundamentalist, theocratic, revisionist Zionist organization that likes to harass people and name people as not being welcome to Israel. Let's see what they said about him, and then we're going to see why they were so mad at him. Okay, so they write, Trey Yingst must be fired from Fox News and deported from our country. Why? Because he said Israeli hospitals should be protected. Palestinian hospitals should be protected. Iranian hospitals should be protected. This isn't hard. So what Betar is saying is that it is a crime to call for Israeli and Palestinian and Iranian hospitals to be protected. I guess they want him to say overtly, protect Israeli hospitals, but don't protect Iranian and Palestinian hospitals.
I mean, that speaks for itself. I mean, that's what Zionism has become. That's who Betar is. I'm going to be a bit of a hater, though, on Trey Yingst. I appreciate what he's doing now. He's being a fair-minded reporter, and he's calling for the protection of Palestinian journalists, and he's even calling for the protection of Palestinian hospitals, which is like, that's a rare thing in corporate media. But for him to call for Palestinian hospitals to be protected, for him, it's hypocritical. Because, first of all, after October 7th, he spread atrocity propaganda. He talked about babies being beheaded. He talked about women being raped, even though he had no evidence for it. He was just repeating what Israeli propagandists had told him to say. So that's the first thing. He helped manufacture consent initially for mass murder. And also on the issue of hospitals, he's especially hypocritical because he also spread some of the initial propaganda that Israel used to attack Al-Shifa Hospital. And he's since done a lot better, and that's to be commended, but it doesn't erase the fact that that's on his record. Yes,
that is relevant, but it doesn't take away from my isn't that weird. The weird part not being him, but the weird part being Betar. Maybe it's not weird because there's such a psychotic death cult, but the weird part for me is that Betar is openly saying that calling for the protection of hospitals in all three places is a crime that should get you deported. Like, do they hear what they're saying? And I should, in all fairness and for the sake of full disclosure and transparency, I do want to show off a little bit, not to brag, but look who got added to Betar's list. Radical extremist Capo added to our list of Jews we recommend not be admitted entrance to Israel. We confirm Sunday at the Knesset, Katie Halper will be among those we recommend not to be allowed in the Jewish state. There you go.
Well, it's heartbreaking for you, Katie. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I had an inferiority complex because you were on it. A lot of people I know were on it. Tony Judd and Adrian Rich were on it, and they're both dead. They've been dead for like over 10 years. So I was like, you got to make room for me, and I guess they did.
I mean, I've talked about this before. Real historic irony for me. It's hard to find the term. Betar, the origins of that movement, helped save my dad's life, and so therefore I'm here in part because of Betar. It's a long story, but it's true. During the Nazi Holocaust, they saved a lot of Hungarian Jews. And my dad and grandmother were among them. And now they're calling for my banning from Israel because I'm opposed to the current genocide that they're supporting. Right. It's weird how history works.
Yeah.
Okay, for Isn't That Terrible, let's turn to a song, a courtesy of a pack of Israelis on the street. We bound and round, we bound and round. that's all I can take. I guess, John McCain would be proud. I mean, this was his original hit. I'm sure he would approve. What can you say about that society that makes songs about bombing a civilian population, starting a war? Those videos inside Israel, people dressing up as pretending to be Palestinians in Gaza, making fun of them.
Or like watching bombs go off and like sitting and watching like they're at a movie theater with popcorn.
Yeah,
Sick.
It speaks for itself. And those have been your 4 basic food groups.
So for this week's Useful Idiots, we have a double feature. We are so excited. First, I spoke to Sina Toossi, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Policy, because, as we explained earlier, Aaron is traveling right now. So I did a live stream with him because things are changing so quickly. And it's right here. You're about to see it, and I think it's really fascinating. And then we're going to introduce another interview that we did together.
So let's go to Sina Toossi.
We are really excited to be here with Sina Toossi, who is a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. We have tons of breaking news to talk about, but before we do that, what do you think is the most important thing for people to know right now about what is happening?
Hey, well, thanks for having me. Right now, I mean, I think the most important thing to know is that this is completely an unnecessary war, unjustified war. This is objectively a war of aggression on Israel's part, that Iran was at the negotiating table. Iran had just done 5 rounds of negotiations with Trump. Trump was adamant that he wanted a deal. And all of a sudden now they're kind of surprise attacking Iran. So this was a war. This is a war of choice. This could be potentially catastrophic for American interests, for stability in the Middle East and the world. And it is entirely due to the recklessness and impunity by which the Israeli government has been acting.
Right. We actually have a video that I wanted you to react to. It's of a news story about the bombing of an Israeli hospital. And there's so much to unpack here. It's from NBC, and it's Richard Engelman. And I think people will be shocked, but not shocked at the same time, to see how this bombing is framed. So let's take a look at this.
Dozens of Iranian ballistic missiles rained down across Israel this morning. Sirens wailed as Israeli air defense systems sprung into action. But at least 4 of Iran's powerful missiles made it through. The Soroka hospital in Beersheba in southern Israel took a direct hit, according to Israeli officials. The impact captured on a cell phone video. Inside, staff and security moved to evacuate patients and search for injured, with sections of the ceiling on the floor. Israel's defense minister called it a war crime, and Prime Minister Netanyahu saying, "We will exact the full price from the tyrants in Tehran." There were no deaths reported, but several injured. Iran said it was aiming for a military site near the hospital. Another missile exploded in Ramat Gan outside Tel Aviv, hitting a business district. And more buildings in nearby Holon. Search and rescue teams arriving quickly.
We have 5 buildings that were hit by the missile. We have one which is the main building and all the other ones surrounding it.
Israel is continuing its strikes across Iran to pick apart the country's military, destroying these Iranian helicopters and missile launchers and nuclear sites. But some nuclear facilities are buried so deeply only American bunker busters can reach them.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on this news, but just as importantly, on the way the media is framing it?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty breathtaking to see, how the American corporate media really manufactures consent to war. This is how it's more blatant. I mean, I would argue that American propaganda compared to the propaganda of many other states has actually, been much more sophisticated. Like it really, in the legacy media and the mainstream media, once you really dig into and track them for a long time, it's clear that they're not independent from the American national security state. It's like some decision is made, and then, a lot of the mainstream outlets, the network news, they just kind of regurgitate the government line, not unlike any authoritarian regime. So it's like we have this illusion of, and I don't want to, there's definitely an element of a free press, and there's good journalists at these outlets, but there's definitely a strong controlled media environment in our mainstream media that manufactures what the national security state was. And in this case, it's this very one-sided narrative about this war that Israel initiated. Israel, a country that has, according to the consensus of genocide scholars, is doing a genocide in Gaza. According to the consensus of human rights activists and experts and organizations, is an apartheid state. So this is not some victim. And Israel has not only, pulverized Gaza and destroyed many hospitals, it's also targeted 2 hospitals in Iran in the past week, which conveniently this report has not mentioned. Now, with that said, I mean, I would argue any attack on a hospital is unjustified, it's condemnable, it is a war crime, but Iran has said that it targeted a military site next to there, similar to what Israel argues with its attacks on hospitals. So this is this impunity that has been created, and I think it's just testament to how our international relations in our world today is going to a very dangerous direction, which is going to be bad for human beings everywhere. But this genie that has been taken out of the bottle, this kind of destruction of norms, has been wholly endorsed by America and Europe, who've trampled on their own self-proclaimed values and institutions and the norms that they claim that they've created about human rights and war crimes and the Geneva Conventions. They've trampled all of that, and this is going to end nowhere good for anybody, I would argue.
Yeah, and I mean the talk of it as a war crime is just so stunning when it's coming from officials from the very government that has bombed hospitals on several occasions during the Gaza genocide and has no apparently awareness of the rank hypocrisy, and they're calling that a war crime while they call what they do justified. They say, oh, it's Hamas is in there, oh, they're human shields. I mean, this attack by Iran didn't even kill anyone. Their attacks on hospitals kills countless people.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, this is Israeli government that thinks we're stupid, that thinks that Americans are stupid, and that thinks, our own, unfortunately, large parts of our media and our national security apparatus also apparently think that we're incredibly stupid. That this is very cheap propaganda. Again, it's much more blatant and cheap than it was. I mean, even in the Iraq War, there was after 9/11, there was massive propaganda. I remember leading up to the invasion of Iraq, the public was much more prepared for it and indoctrinated to support it. This is kind of just out of the blue surprise attack. Trump didn't talk about doing, Trump ran as an anti-war candidate. He was pursuing these negotiations with Iran. If anything, all the reporting in the past 6 months has really been that Netanyahu wants to go to war with Iran, and Trump was kind of pushing back. I mean, we can get into, some theories about exactly what was going on there later, but it's kind of out of the blue. All of a sudden, we're on the cusp of this major Middle Eastern war, and we're expected to support it on behalf of this criminal regime that is really trying to take advantage of American power and American lives and have us to go fight for it. And it doesn't make any sense for Americans, for any, I think, reasonable definition of American interest. If American interest is about the prosperity and security and livelihoods of people in our country, none of that is going to be benefited by going to war against Iran in the Middle East, a country that posed no direct threat to America, that its whole military doctrine is fundamentally defensive, as the Pentagon itself has acknowledged. I mean, we can get into the discussion about the nuclear program, but there's no reasonable way you can talk about Iran posing a threat to America. Iran is a very, it's a country that we've debilitated for decades through severe economic strangulation and sanctions and covert actions, and have prepped the ground for this war. But there's no way that it doesn't have an offensive military posture. So this is a war that is for Israel and its kind of hegemonic, imperialistic ambitions in the Middle East to dominate this region, to rule over the impoverished, destabilized region as kind of fortress Israel that's expansionist, that is trying to, displace the Palestinians and displace, people in neighboring countries. And so we're expected to support this. So I think this is a moment for Americans to really stand up and be like, this makes absolutely no sense. Why are we in? Israel is not an ally, and Israel is the bad actor here. And we should, if anything, we should pressure them not to join a war for them against, this other country.
Right. And as you just mentioned the double standards. And if you look at the reporting, the West's reaction to the bombing of an Israeli hospital compared to the reaction to the bombings of Iranian hospitals that have been fatal, and never mind the decimation of Gaza hospitals, it's just, it's kind of beyond parity.
Yeah, and it's like, Israel began this war last Thursday by targeting residential areas in Tehran. I mean, they claim that there's military officials, political officials. I mean, that's not even justified. Putting that aside, it's an
Right.
unprovoked attack.
Right.
Immediately, there were big images, videos coming out of Iran of kids killed, babies under the rubble, just like Gaza. Within a couple of days, Iranian hospitals were struck. Iranian, media stations, national media, even police stations. I mean, it really betrays that their aim is all over the place. They don't have a coherent strategic aim. They're just trying to drag the U.S. into this war to fight it for them and take out a rival of them. But they're kind of all over the place. They're trying to stoke unrest. They're trying to stoke instability. They're trying to stoke chaos. I don't think, they're in for a big quagmire ultimately, and we're potentially in for a big quagmire as well. But yeah, the hypocrisy is just astounding and very blatant.
Yeah. So speaking of the nuclear program, there's been a lot of confusion over the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency's report, because of, the way that Israel and many in the Western media, legacy media, have been reporting on it. Can you tell us what the IAEA report found regarding Iran's nuclear weapons program?
Yeah, it really is preposterous how they're trying to manipulate this. And I think the IAEA and its chief, Rafael Grossi, deserves a lot of blame too, because they were used and they have been used to advance a war agenda, which they probably didn't want, but they allowed themselves to be used in that way. So this report that came out was a report that came with a political timing. It was nothing urgent about Iran is about to dash to the bomb. It was about part of these efforts to pressure Iran economically and at the UN over these negotiations to get a deal. This report, like the most damning thing about this report was that, and the IAEA itself acknowledges this, that Iran had undeclared nuclear sites before 2003, and that it moved some of the material from those sites. None of the material, and the IAEA report explicitly says this, it has no bearing on Iran's current nuclear program. It's not indicative of any kind of structured nuclear weapons program, any dash to the bomb. It was just a report to censure Iran, to lay the groundwork for going to the UN and trying to get UN sanctions on Iran in like October. And even the IAEA and them, I mean, the Europeans who supported it, their whole framing and, talking to some of these people and these diplomats, like the whole idea of it was to kind of build diplomatic pressure on Iran. But meanwhile, now we're seeing a week later, this report that was not at all indicative of any kind of alarming, like Iranians are going to build a weapon. They're not building a weapon. Our own intelligence community has said they're not building a weapon. They have an advanced nuclear program, which became advanced because we left the nuclear deal and we put them in a defensive spiral. So yeah, I think it's really atrocious how this report is being manipulated. Is the onus of our journalist class, of our analyst class, to tell the American public the truth about what's going on here, to hold to account these institutions that are trying to get us into a very self-defeating, self-destructive war that's not going to benefit anybody but a very small clique of our own elites and elites in Israel and their own narrow interests.
And speaking of the IAEA, here is a video of the Director General of the IAEA, Rafael Mariano Grossi, and it's from June 11th. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
Informed, and what we reported was that we did not have, as in coincidence with some of the sources you mentioned there, that we did not have any proof of a systematic effort to move into a nuclear weapon.
I think it was an important consideration. I understand what you're saying, but the fact that they continue to cite this report.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, even Rafael Grossi, like, I am increasingly just not a fan. And, even like Mohammed El-Baradei, the former chief of the IAEA, has been critical. I mean, he's right. I mean, there's no systematic effort, but even the word systematic is what kind of rubs me the wrong way. He's still trying to seemingly allude that, there's like there's no evidence of Iran building a nuclear weapon, enriching uranium to weaponization levels, building a warhead, none of this stuff. There's no evidence of diversion of nuclear material from its nuclear sites. So there is absolutely zero evidence, systematic or not, of reflecting of a systematic effort for a bomb or a non-systematic one. Now, I'm sure the material has been diverted. I mean, the Iranians would be dumb if they're not trying to maybe enrich to 90% whatever they're doing. I mean, they're under they are actually in an existential war, I would argue. But yeah, it just goes to show that, a lot of these institutions that are supposed to be impartial and kind of keepers of the global order, they are ultimately reflective of the power dynamics in the global order and the influence of America and Israel and its European allies. And the IAEA has been susceptible to that. With that said, I mean, even Rafael Grossi, even the current, structure at the IAEA, they've been very much trying to get a deal, very much trying to be, like he's been, I don't think he's like a warmonger, Rafael Grossi. He's not trying to but he's been caught up in this, I think that report was just such a bad idea.
Right. So you have family in Iran. Can you tell us what people there are saying, the people that you know, and perhaps how what they're experiencing and reporting back compares to what we're hearing from Western media?
Yeah, so I was born in Iran, in Tehran, actually. I was 5 years old when we immigrated to America. But, I have many, uncles, aunts, grandparents who are in Iran. They're all, I mean, we've lost contact with them now because the internet is severely limited and basically shut down at times. I think this is partly the Iranian government limiting internet connections for internal security reasons, partly cyber attacks that are going on. But yeah, I mean, my family is devastating. Like my grandmother, for example, is over 90 years old. She has, we had a caretaker for her. And so her caretaker is this young, woman in her 20s, and she's like a secular woman. She's not, she doesn't wear hijab or whatnot. And my dad was talking to her the other day, and my dad was asking the caretaker, are you going to leave? Because at that point, Trump is threatening people to evacuate Tehran. And the caretaker said that I'm not going to, I'll be here until my last breath, taking care of your mom. And, or my cousin, his dad is very ill, for example. And he actually his dad had a surgery planned for this week. And then he's like, what are we going to do? My dad, he can't even leave the house, really. They were going to go take him to surgery. They live near that Tajri Square, which is a very vibrant and this famous bazaar in North Tehran that is very beautiful place. And Israel bombed that location a couple blocks from where they live. So yeah, this is an indiscriminate war. This is a war of, a war aimed at the destruction of Iran as a nation state, I would argue. It has nothing to do with the Islamic Republic or this kind of theocratic government that has many shortcomings. And, a lot of people in Iran are very discontent. They don't like this government. They wanted fundamental change. But now we're seeing a big rally around the flag effect, a big rally around not the regime, a rally around the country, Iran, which Iranians distinguish between their government and Iran as a entity that has been around for thousands of years, and this kind of their territorial integrity and defending their country. And everything I see is a pervasive, unprecedented outpouring of national solidarity in a country that was very polarized. Much like America and so many countries now, Iran had become a very polarized society along various divides, political, religious. So now, I mean, I think that's another thing that they didn't calculate. Netanyahu and Trump, it's a big mistake. They misread Iranian politics, Iranian public sentiment. And now what they're doing is they're facing a united country of 90 million people in a country that's very large, mountainous, very defensive. It's surrounded by the Zagros and Alborz mountain ranges. The Iranian plateau has been a secure location for millennia. So this will be a war that is if America actually enters it, it'll be like a Vietnam, honestly. I think it's going to be a disaster for Trump, which is why he's probably, it seemed like he was going to join the other day, but now he seems a little bit more hesitant. We'll see what happens. I'm not holding my breath. I mean, I don't underestimate Trump's stupidity and just, his ability, him getting manipulated by the Israelis. But if he does it, I think it's going to doom his political life, and it's going to be very bad for America as a global power. This is going to benefit China, Russia. I mean, if we just get sucked in spending another $10 trillion in the Middle East, it's insane.
So what is motivating Trump here? What explains his, I think Hexet's called it his strategic unpredictability? Who is he listening to, if not,
I don't know.
for instance, Tulsi Gabbard?
So, there's this madman doctrine in international relations, which is like, if leaders act so unpredictable and crazy, it actually might benefit the country. Like Mao Zedong or Nixon even had a kind of madman doctrine. But at the end of the day, the idea is that they're rational actors, but that strategically they portray themselves as mad and unpredictable. They might do anything. Trump, he might actually be mad, but he's also could be, the thing is, he ran obviously as he said he was anti-war. He criticized, his whole political career was kind of started by being, I remember in 2016, his strong criticisms of the Iraq war, how stupid that was, strong criticisms of Middle East wars. And yet he surrounded himself with a lot of the traditional neo-hawk warmongers. But it seemed like he had in his mind this idea of like being a tough negotiator. And so you're going to have a John Bolton and a Mike Pompeo. You're going to scare the other side. But at the end of the day, you don't want war. You want a deal. And that kind of, in his first term, Bolton and Pompeo, for example, sabotaged efforts to get a deal with Iran. They sabotaged efforts with North Korea and stuff. But with that said, Trump almost went to war in his first term against Iran after they killed Soleimani, after Iran shot down a U.S. drone in 2019. But then he pulled back at the last minute. This time around, he also ran as kind of an anti-war candidate. He said, I'm going to end these wars. We're not going to have any wars. I'm going to be a president of peace. God save me because we're going to have peace. And then he started seeking a deal with Iran. He even when he reimposed some sanctions on Iran in February in a memorandum, he said that I don't want to do this. I want to get a deal. A lot of people want me to do this, but the Iranians, let's make a deal. And there was kind of lax and somewhat lax enforcement over the past couple of months. He also wrote a letter to Iran Supreme Leader Khamenei, where he apparently the letter was very respectful. It initiated this diplomatic process, 5 rounds of negotiations. Other things are that, like in January, I remember Trump retweeted a Tucker Carlson interview with Jeffrey Sachs, where Jeffrey Sachs was trying to say that Netanyahu is trying to take America into a war with Iran, drag America. So Trump on some level is seemingly cognizant of these factors. And so what happened last week was that I think, the US and Iran may have very well been on the cusp of a initial framework deal, like not a final deal, but they were on the cusp of like getting to an agreement on principles. There was supposed to be a round of negotiations last Sunday in Oman with Steve Witkoff and the Iranian foreign minister. And so the Israelis, I think their worst case scenario is to have America come to some level of terms with Iran, kind of diminish its regional presence somewhat, get to a more balanced foreign policy in the Middle East, pivot to Asia, whatever. Israel is this expansionist, hegemonic power that really relies entirely on American support. It needs America it wants to get America bogged down in the Middle East. So it's always giving it unconditional support, everything supporting its expansionist, destabilizing agenda. So I think Netanyahu and them, it seems, there's 2 schools of thought. One school of thought is that Trump was basically playing 4D chess and the whole negotiations were a big ruse and they prepared this whole strike and he had green-lighted it maybe a month back. And this was all just a ruse. Another school of thought, which I am more convinced was what's happening, is that, no, they're not that smart. They're not that strategic. This is, they had done some preparations, potentially as diplomatic leverage, whatever, to intimidate Iran. But then it seems like Netanyahu can potentially, he's been pressuring Trump a shit ton to abandon these negotiations, to go to war, strike. And, many of Netanyahu's acolytes in the administration have also been doing this. Mike Waltz was doing it. Trump seemingly fired him for that reason, but even Rubio is a neocon. So many people around, Hegseth. But then Trump, the school of thought that he actually, Netanyahu came to him probably with like, hey, you gave him 60 days. It's 61 days. That 60-day thing is bullshit too. It's unclear when exactly the 60 days was given, when that timeline started, when it ends. Regardless, they had another meeting scheduled that all sides were wanting to go to. But it seems like Netanyahu, this narrative that Trump loves, a narrative that he can sell that shows him as strong and tough. And so Netanyahu's like, yeah, we're going to go take out all their top generals. We're going to bomb, all these sites. It's going to go great. It's going to help you get a deal. So you saw initially Trump was, that Thursday morning when they took out like Iran's top military leadership, Trump was like, okay, this might actually go well. Like Israel's got this. And then he came out and he's like, this is excellent. I support it. The Iranians should have made a deal. They should come make a deal now. He still talks about wanting a deal, but obviously when you bomb a country, the idea that you're going to get a deal is going to be infinitely harder, if not impossible. And now we've seen when the Iranians kind of quickly reconstituted themselves, and it has become clear since last Thursday that this is going to be a major quagmire. And so now Trump is left in this position as someone who has had these kind of instincts to not get involved in the Middle East, who on the other hand has Netanyahu and all these neocons and the warmongering kind of establishment media and national security state elements of it in America all pushing for this, that he is now torn in indecision. I mean, people expected a decision yesterday, the other day. It seems like, there's some element of decision paralysis within the administration. With that said, he might very well decide to enter this war because it's not going well for them. It's not going well for the Israelis. I mean, if Trump doesn't enter it, it's going to go bad for them. If he enters it, it's going to go bad for them. It's really no good decision. I mean, at the end of the day, this is Netanyahu's fault. I think America should fundamentally reassess its relations with Israel, that this is not a strategic partner. This is not an ally. And it really makes no sense, even if you view things in kind of a realist, very cold international, like an IR way, where you could argue America, if it's trying to keep a dominant global position, China is a peer competitor. Russia could be a challenging factor. So they want to bleed Russia and Ukraine. They want to bleed, they want to balance China in the Pacific Sea, not let it take Taiwan. Okay, in some realm of this kind of IR wonky realist school. But Iran is a mid-tier debilitated state. It's not a great power. It never put, the beneficial thing for America was to come to some kind of strategic terms with Iran, peel it away from Russia and China, have a more balanced foreign policy in the Middle East where it deals with the Iranians, it deals with Israel, it deals with the Saudis, it maximizes its leverage, it doesn't get pulled into underwriting any one side. Just like the Chinese do, just like the Russians do, they give themselves diplomatic flexibility, they deal with all these countries. But Trump is now getting dragged into this strategic quagmire, which is America's actual adversaries, which I'm against escalation with Russia and China as well. But even for these kind of foreign policy blob people who are obsessing about, we got to preserve American hegemony in the world, whatever, go after these countries. This war in Iran is going to be very counterproductive against them. Right. Iran is they're going to get stuck in a quagmire that's going to entirely benefit China and Russia. And I'm sure they're going to actually do their utmost to bleed America and Iran. And there's already suggestions that, for example, the Chinese are doing that.
So we're going to return to some questions that I have for you about what's happening in Iran, the Iranian leadership, what the impact of all of this is on their nuclear development. But before we go there, I just want to show a clip of Tucker Carlson, whom you mentioned, on Steve Bannon's show. And here they are talking about why Trump is ignoring Tulsi Gabbard's intelligence assessment, saying that Iran was not close to having nuclear weapons. So let's take a look.
Why was Tulsi Gabbard not invited to the Why was Tulsi Gabbard not invited to the Camp David meeting all day?
You know why.
Why Tulsi Gabbard still to the American public has said the last public statement is that the program was not back up and running. And now we have from Bibi by himself on Fox by Brent Baer that the thing was 12 to 13 months away. It wasn't this weekend.
I know.
And this is by his own thing. And we also know that it was a decapitation, as we said on Friday. It wasn't just about the nuclear program. It's a decapitation of total leadership. So this is a total regime change, which, by the way, you may have a plan for regime change, is fine, but you got to bring the American people along. Let me go back.
By the way, I said that publicly last week. This is the point of this is regime change. I know everyone involved. I know I'm telling the truth. I have no weird motive here at all. I don't hate Israel. I'm not.
Plus, you know the players, and you went
know the players personally.
And you know the Iraq situation.
This isn't a regime change effort, and why not just say that? But you're a Holocaust denier for saying that. Well, stop. Let's have a rational conversation about what our aims are here, and maybe you can convince me that we need to support a regime change war in Iran. Tell me how that plays out in a country of 90 million people. Have you thought it through? Do you even care? And the answer is no. We have a economic and political and demographic crisis in Europe because of U.S.-backed, Israel-backed
Syria
wars in the Middle East.
Yeah.
That's what's destroyed Europe, where my ancestors came from. And I spend a lot of time there, and I love European culture, which is Christian culture. And it's destroyed that. And shut up, you're not allowed to care. Who's making the rules here?
So it's interesting that you have Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon, people who I personally don't really see eye to eye with on many issues, but on this, they're like just calling out reality.
Yeah, I mean, it just the way I like, the way Tucker Carlson talks that I like, it's very common sense. Like, this is just common sense. I mean, the stuff he brought up with Ted Cruz right now, this clip he just played. I mean, same here. Like, I'm a lefty. I've never been a fan of these guys, but on this issue, they're 100% correct, and if we have any, there's no way, if anyone has a coherent ideology of America first, that we should be prioritizing the welfare and security and prosperity of Americans as the American state and the American government that we vote for. This is not it. So at least these people are consistent. They're morally consistent, on many things I might not agree with, but on this, they're 100% right. And I think, when it comes to healing America, okay, so America, just like I said earlier, we've become very polarized. We've had all these divisions that have hurt our country. This is an opportunity for a new politics to get past the kind of traditional divides in this country and build bridges between people on the left and the right who have, on this issue, a very strong, I mean, this is a key issue. It's just not about Iran. I mean, this issue of America's foreign policy posture in the world, this quest for global hegemony, global empire, that I think, as they rightly said, it is really, it's unsustainable. No empire in history has been sustainable. They always succumb to imperial overstretch, which is exactly what we're seeing happen right now, where if Russia makes a move for the Baltic states, it's either America has to go to World War III or the whole NATO alliance is going to collapse. If China makes a move for Taiwan, it's either we go to World War III or America's alliance system in the Pacific. If right now with Israel, I mean, it's way dumber because, again, in America, it's to its strategic benefit to come to terms with Iran. But now we're going to like a major war for Israel, which is actually a strategic liability. So this quest for global hegemony and dominance and empire is really the key issue of our era in the 21st century right now. That America, we were, after World War II, we emerged as the victor. Half of global GDP was in America. We helped build a global order that was imperfect and in many ways, flawed in many ways. It caused a lot of human suffering in many ways. I don't want to, make light of that, but the American global, dominance also has a lot of benefits, I would argue, for the world. There's certain, at least we profess good things. We try to, which I think there is value in that. I'm a very strong critic of America's, a lot of America's foreign policy, but now it's totally unsustainable. We're transitioning to a multipolar global order. We need to acknowledge the legitimate interests of some of these other countries, not try to go dominate everyone, intervene everyone, get Ukraine to join NATO, get Taiwan to go to, sacrifice itself for preserving American hegemony. And so we need to transition to a more, the kind of global equilibrium, a global balance that is much more safe for everyone. This is a time for like Bismarckian diplomacy. We need statesmen. We need visionary diplomats, not, a lot of these idiots we have right now. So it's very dangerous. And I think Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon, it seems to me that they get a lot of this actually. Yeah. And so this is important.
Yeah. Speaking of the regime change, this is from a couple days ago, but I think it's relevant to play. Here's Netanyahu making that case very clearly.
And now top military commanders, senior nuclear scientists, the Islamic regime's most significant enrichment facility, and a large portion of its ballistic missile arsenal. More is on the way. The regime doesn't know what hit them. They don't know what will hit them. The nation of Iran and the nation of Israel have been true friends since the days of Cyrus the Great. And the time has come for you to unite around your flag and your historic legacy by standing up for your freedom from an evil and oppressive regime. It has never been weaker. This is your opportunity to stand up and let your voices be heard. Woman, life, freedom. Zan, Zandegi, Azadi. As I said yesterday and many times before, Israel's fight is not with you. It's not with you, the brave people of Iran, whom we respect and admire. Our fight is with our common enemy, a murderous regime that both oppresses you and impoverishes you. Brave people of Iran, your light will defeat the darkness. I'm with you. The people of Israel are with you.
Okay, so I know it's laughable. I heard you laughing. It's like we're watching a stand-up routine. But what are your thoughts on this set? From
God, where to start? I mean, you're hurting me by showing me this.
Sorry, I should have given a trigger warning.
Yeah, that really deserved a trigger alert.
Yeah.
So where to start? I mean, it's just funny with the Cyrus the Great stuff because Netanyahu conveniently, when it suits him, he cites different biblical stories when it comes to Iran. So one is his biblical story of Cyrus the Great liberating Jews in Babylon 2,500 years ago, this ancient Persian king. And now another biblical story I've heard in Israel, he does this a lot more when it comes to demonize Iran. He's like, these are it's a story of Esther. So he's like, these Iranians, they try to destroy. It's the same Iranian empire, mind you. It's an Achaemenid empire. It's the same Iranian entity of Cyrus the Great. Domestically in Israel, he's like, these are the same people who wanted to kill us since the time of the Achaemenid Empire. This is the story of Esther, which they were trying to plot a genocide against the Jews. And actually, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that story kind of ended in a reverse genocide where hundreds of thousands of Amaleks were killed. And so they call Iranians Amalek. I mean, Netanyahu has explicitly said, these are Amaleks. These are and they also use that language. So it's like, it's this religious fanaticism. It's also reflective of a religious fanaticism. Israel, I think increasingly is like ISIS with nukes. It's like it's ISIS with nukes with the backing of the entire West. So they're religious fanatics. They engage in genocidal slaughter. They're destroying, they're trying to destabilize the region. I don't see much different. I don't think there's that much moral difference between, what they're doing. And so Netanyahu right now, this women life, he's liberating Iranian women. I think it was Max Blumenthal that had a tweet that said that they're liberating Iranian women from their lives.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Like one murder at a time. I mean, this is the same thing with the LGBTQ people in Gaza. It's like you care so much about them. You want to free them by killing them.
Yeah. And, these are societies that have their own culture wars. They have to develop organically. Right. Yes, I don't like the theocratic rules in Iran, the regulations in Iran, the mandatory hijab that has largely now become, they're not enforcing it for the past couple of years as much. And so right now, you see men, again, how it's backfiring for him. It's like you see there's many videos right now, Iranian women without a hijab in Tehran who are like, fuck you, Netanyahu, fuck you, Israel. Yeah. Like we're fighting for our country. I just saw a video of all these people on motorcycles driving through Tehran with their flags. And usually that's like the Basij people who do that, like the hardline kind of, religious kind of people who support the system. But it was interesting. I was watching this video. I'll tweet it later today. There's so many women without the hijab, with all next to these Basiji dudes holding the Iranian flag on the motorcycle. So this is resulting in a very interesting, again, when it came to the polarization in Iran, that this is resulting in something very interesting happening in Iranian society. It's a rally around the country. It's seemingly healing some of these divisions that have existed. But regardless, that is a country that has to undergo its own organic, social, political, cultural growth, just like any other country. For this guy to come and women, life, freedom, whatever. Yeah, the women, life, freedom movement was an amazing movement. It was a necessary movement. It resulted in, some hard-fought gains for women in that country. But, this guy's obviously trying to exploit that, co-opted to destroy Iran. Netanyahu, at the same time as he says this, he supports the Iranian monarchists, which are explicitly fascist, explicitly intolerant of any kind of free speech, any kind of debate, any kind of dissent. They go after all these Iranian opposition people, everyone. At the same time as he supports these Iranian monarchists, who the Iranian monarchists don't like the ethnic minorities in Iran, and even the Pahlavi regimes. He also supports the ethnic separatists in Iran. And, certain elements of, Kurds, Baluchis. I mean, they're all supporting Iran right now, but there are separatist elements. So this just betrays an aim to just collapse the country and have Iranians at each other's throats. So he'll say this, he'll say that. At the end of the day, Netanyahu's war is not with the Islamic Republic. It's not with Hamas, I would argue. It's with this vision of this, this ISIS with nuclear weapons, this Israel that is this expansionist, apartheid, genocidal state. That what happens if Iran collapses and descends into chaos, like Syria, like Yemen, like Libya, like Iraq, like Afghanistan, like Lebanon, that what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next is they're going to take out West Bank. They're going to take all those Palestinians into Jordan. Jordan's going to collapse. Egypt at that hand, this corrupt Egyptian dictatorship is just going to be left with what? They'll probably go back into the Sinai. This is this idea. This is this expansionist view of Zionism. Zionism is not a monolithic ideology. I think there was room for all these people to live side by side and with equal rights, with peace, side by side. And Jewish people, I think, have deserved, safety and security, obviously, in that land as well. I would argue
they lived there in safety before they tried to impose a demographic majority.
Yeah. But even in this framework of this Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there was, a two-state solution, which the Israelis negated by moving 600,000 religious zealots in the West Bank since Oslo. I mean, it's a joke, and we're still talking about it. But regardless, this current strand of Zionism seems very expansionist, destructive, and it has nothing to do with the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic is going to go tomorrow, if it goes tomorrow. All these people who are going to say, the Islamic Republic was the root of all the region's ills. We'll see what happens then. We'll see once Jordan falls apart, once, they're moving for the West Bank, once then Egypt is going to, balance of threat. Turkey is now the new big scapegoat in Syria. Syria, they're bombing. There is no Hamas, Hezbollah, or Iran in Syria now. No Islamic Republic. They're bombing the shit out of Syria. They're taking its territory. They don't want sanctions removed. This is a country, it's like it's a colony of the US and Europe that is trying to dominate the strategically important region with hydrocarbons and energy resources in a very kind of, old school imperialistic, violent, colonial way.
It's so interesting because all the discourse from Western politicians and Western media is that Iran is this irrational actor and we can't trust them with nuclear weapons because who knows what they're going to do. But Iran seems about 17,000 times more rational than the U.S. government.
Yeah, no, the Islamic Republic, for all my opposition to them, they're very rational leaders for their own interests. Even if Iran got nuclear weapons, they're not going to go nuke Israel. They want it for their own defense. It's ridiculous. Even U.S. officials, intelligence community assessments, Joint Chiefs of, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I remember Martin Dempsey, the former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Obama. He made a point to consistently at that time to say, Iran's a rational actor. They're not, Netanyahu is the one not a rational actor, not for, he seems, it's interesting. I was reading about this psychological definition of evil, which is like this dark triad personality traits. It's like human beings who lack empathy, who have Machiavellian, this ends justify the means approach, and they're narcissistic. So it's like people who have these three traits, they're like in the self spiral. It's very hard to pull them out of it. They're incredibly destructive. And so Netanyahu, he seems to have all the hallmarks of the dark triad. He's an evil person. And I think it has to do with his own interests at the end of the day. It's not even Israel's interests. It's his own, maintaining power, not falling out and, go to the courts, going to jail on corruption charges. And it's just this war with Iran trying to sabotage what Trump was doing is a Hail Mary. I read it as desperation. I think he's more desperate than ever. But that also makes me worried because, again, ISIS with nukes. But they might use a nuke.
ISIS with nukes that pretends to be the only democracy in the Middle East, pretends not to be a theocracy. At least ISIS is honest about what it is. They're evil, but they're honest about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a joke. It's a joke. Even for the, there's so much discrimination against and institutionalized discrimination against Israeli-Palestinian, Palestinians within Israel, the 1948 borders. And it's funny because this just made me think of the Zohran debates in New York City, where he calls for Israel state with equal rights. Okay. And people in New York City are giving him shit. Why is that controversial? Even so, you're acknowledging then that Israel is not a democracy.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's one thing I wish people had said more, that even the people who give that guy in New York City, Zohran, who's running for mayor shit, it's like you're acknowledging then that
exactly
by criticizing him for saying he wants an Israeli state, you're acknowledging it's not that. It's not equal rights. It is an apartheid ethno-supremacist state that is expansionist, that is apartheid. So, yeah.
Yeah, they're basically saying you're an anti-Semite because you want Israel to not be a theocratic ethno state, which really isn't a good thing for the Jews, by the way. I make this point a lot, but if that's anti-Semitism, you're suggesting that all Jews support an ethno state. apartheid ethno state. So,
And it's interesting, actually, just on that point, I think one other thing that bears saying is the similarities between the Islamic Republic and Israel. There's actually some similarities that are very interesting because they're both 20th century ideologies that are exploiting these religions, these ancient religions, for modern political ends. The Islamic Republic is actually a very heterodox interpretation of Shia Islam. Shia Islam has historically been very non-political, quietist, they call it. So, even Khomeini had to do a lot to get the seminaries and get people to get on board with his vision, which is more about a radical political vision than a religious one. And he created this kind of heterodox idea of this clerical leadership, which the seminaries were actually against. And even in Iraq, for example, the Ayatollah Sistani, the other Shia powers are against. Similarly, Zionism is trying to take this ancient religion and formulate this political ideology for the 21st century. And they're both using and abusing these traditional religions. I think the Islamic Republic has been responsible for a lot of Islamophobia by doing everything in the name of Islam when it's really this political entity that is heterodox with the traditional way the religion has been practiced in Iran, and has pushed a lot of Iranians away from religion. And I think similarly, Israel is very heterodox with traditional Judaism, I would argue, you know better than me, and very, I think also just like they foster Islamophobia, they foster anti-Semitism through their actions. So both of these regimes are not good regimes at the end of the day for the religions that they claim to represent.
Right. One has a lot more blood on its hands than the other, but I see your point, yes. So I know that you have to leave, and you've been so generous with your time. Any final thoughts you want to share? If not, we can just have you on.
No, I think we just need, maximum public outcry, organization like the Iraq War. There's massive protests, there was massive movements in 2003. It didn't work ultimately, but it created a political cost. Obama emerged from that. To this day, many of us were radicalized from that era, and we entered anti-war politics. So right now is a time for organization, is a time for rallies, is a time for calling your members of Congress, Democrat or Republican, telling them we don't want this war. Please call your members of Congress. That is effective. It's, this is a constitutional crisis. Trump does not have constitutional authority to wage a war. That this, our Constitution gives authority to Congress to wage war. They don't have an authorization for military action against Iran. So if he does attack Iran, it's going to be illegal under American law, under the Constitution. So we need to make that clear. We need to call our members of Congress, and we need to do our utmost to prevent this from happening.
Well, thank you so much, Sina Toossi. And I hope your family is okay. And everyone in Iran is in my thoughts. And when I say that, I don't mean therefore we should bomb them. I mean, we should not bomb them and let them live. And that's, if you want people to have freedom, you got to let them live. Thank you so much. And we will see you another time. Thank you so much.
Goodbye. Bye, everyone.
And thank you again to Sina Toossi for joining us, who is very, very busy these days. We really appreciate him taking the time. And that was a great interview you did, Katie. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, we have Negar Razavi. She is Associate Research Scholar at Princeton University's Iran and Persian Gulf Center. We talked to her about media coverage of Israel's assault on Iran and some of the complexities involved in trying to understand this conflict. Let's go to Negar Razavi. Negar Razavi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Aaron and Katie.
I want to start by showing you a headline from the New York Times. This is just shocking to see this printed in the paper of record. This is what it says. Israeli strikes kill civilians across Iran. And, after a year and a half of Israeli genocide in Gaza, a headline like this, just a straightforward factual headline that applies agency to Israel as it kills civilians, is a rarity. It's almost unheard of. So your thoughts on this and the overall, media climate in this Israeli assault on Iran?
Yeah, the fact that we are all shocked by this headline is in itself shocking, right? Exactly what you just said. We have come to expect the mainstream media to always center Israeli lives when they are lost, and to always put the losses of Palestinian lives, Lebanese lives, Yemeni lives, and now Iranian lives in the passive tense. They have somehow died without the aggressor being named. And I think the fact that this was just given straightforward, They reported the numbers that are coming out of the Iranian health ministry. And then they went ahead and took one step further and went and interviewed 50 people inside Iran to actually add some texture to those losses and to actually tell the stories of the people who have been killed. This is unprecedented. And the fact that we are starting with this and remarking on how exceptional it is in itself, it tells us a lot about the Iran discussion and the Iran debate.
And, being in the U.S., watching how the media has been covering the Israeli assault so far, I mean, what have been your impressions and what do you think is missing from the discussion?
I think the fact that it started all of the media coverage started off with precisely the language that Israel wanted to sell this as a preemptive war set us up on the wrong foot, right? Preemptive implies that Iran was about to attack Israel, right? That is what preemptive means in legal discourse. Iran was heading into a 6th round of negotiations with the United States in Oman on Sunday. There was no indication that they were going to attack Israel. And so the fact that the media parroted that language right away was really troubling, because since then we have had to try to do everything in our power to undo it. It's kind of like in media, whoever gets there first sets the tone of the debate. And they set the tone of the debate. And now we're trying to claw it back and say, no, this was an illegal attack. It was an act of aggression. And Iran, according to Article 51 of the UN, has a right to self-defense.
Negar, can you tell us how what is happening right now relates to the research that you do and what insights you have into the current affairs based on your research?
Yeah, so I study Washington, D.C. think tanks and the role that they play in shaping U.S. policy. A lot of people don't know what think tanks do, but they're supposed to essentially be these intermediaries between the government on the one side, where people are way too busy to think about things, right? Because they have to get up and actually do the work of governing, and they have their own analysts who are responding in real time. And then academics who they see, in their own words, as being really slow, taking forever to put out research. So the think tanks were supposed to be these intermediaries. And there's a lot of think tanks in Washington, right? There's like hundreds of think tanks that work on foreign policy. And they have these experts who come forward and claim to have authoritative knowledge on Iran and the broader Middle East, and every issue you can think of. And so what I wanted to know is, what role are they playing in shaping the narrative on Iran in particular? What I found is that despite there being all these people claiming to have expertise on Iran, they're essentially saying the same thing, and they're not actually advancing a debate. Right? There isn't a real debate on Iran within Washington. There are a few outliers, and they're trying their best to inject some critique of what we in academia call the common sense. But essentially, they're manufacturing the same set of talking points about Iran that makes us understand Iran less and less over time.
And what are some of those talking points?
It starts with Iran being the most destabilizing force in the Middle East. This is one of their favorite talking points. And then that gets parroted in the government, right? So and you can trace this. I do this in my own research, a phrase or an idea gets introduced in a report, and then it gets repeated and repeated and repeated to the point that it just becomes truth. So this one about Iran being the major destabilizing force in the region is never caveated or explained alongside the role that the U.S. has played. Right? Like, let's use Iraq as an example. They'll say Iran is destabilizing Iraq, but they will never mention that the U.S. invaded Iraq illegally and that they are the primary source of destabilization in that country, right? Or they will ignore the role that Israel has played, or Saudi Arabia has played, or the Emirates have played. And I'm talking about think tanks that are associated with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. This goes across partisan lines.
Are there any think tanks that you think do a good job at dealing with these issues and kind of grappling with the nuances?
I think there's a few. The Quincy Institute that has come out, they actually were formed after my primary field work. And they're trying very much, again, across party lines, interestingly,
right,
to break through this narrative that just ensures the forever wars, the Center for International Policy is another great one. And then there's smaller advocates, groups that have their own experts that are also trying to break through the Washington common sense, or the blob,
right,
as Obama's people used to call it.
So Quincy, which you mentioned, the Quincy Institute, the executive director is Trita Parsi, who is born in Iran. But I think it's fair to say, that Trita Parsi, when it comes to Iranian nationals who are now in Western think tanks, that his views are in a minority. I mean, talk about it. And I don't know if you want to name names or not, but the role of the Iranian diaspora in these think tanks that promote warmongering with Iran.
I just want to say that we as a community are not a monolith. We have divisions amongst ourselves, and we should treat the Iranian community as we treat any community, right? We have all kinds of people who represent various ideological perspectives vis-a-vis Iran, vis-a-vis Israel, vis-a-vis the United States. But overwhelmingly, who gets represented in the think tanks are one slice of that. And that tends to be, as you alluded to, the pro-regime change, oftentimes with a military component tied to it, meaning some type of foreign intervention. And they have very powerful backers, right? And they have promoters, they have, really strong communications teams within their think tanks. They can go on the Hill and immediately get a meeting. The media will give them interviews. They get invited to the White House all the time, regardless of who's in power. They just have access and they get platformed. So they seem to represent a much bigger chunk of the Iranian community, or the Iranian diaspora community, than actually reflects the reality. And someone like Trita has been attacked. And I do want to point out one thing, that under the first Trump administration, the State Department funded a Iran misinformation project, which was supposed to stop misinformation that was coming from Iran to the United States. But instead, what it became was an attack platform against anyone in the United States who wanted diplomacy with Iran. And so there would be targeted attacks against anyone who was pro-diplomacy from within, and they put Iranian faces on the face of this project. So unfortunately, we have a lot to work out as a community, and a lot of that is going to have to happen through painful processes. But in the meantime, we're in a crisis moment, so it's hard to parse that all out.
Can you talk about some of these factions? Like, you have the diasporic communities, you have people who I guess are called, I don't know if they self-identify this way, but monarchists. I'm not sure if that's just a pejorative term or that's what they call themselves. And then within Iran, there's always talk of hardliners and kind of more reform-minded people. Can you just give us kind of a walk through those?
And on that front, I mean, since we're also talking about media as well, I mean, here's an example. Here's a headline from the Financial Times. Iran's exiled royal calls for regime change, but few are listening.
Reza Pahlavi, who is the son of the former Shah of Iran, who lives in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., has been a mainstay of the pro-regime change sphere in Washington, D.C. He regularly gets invited by right-wing think tanks like the Hudson Institute to give speeches. He's then supported by a group of Iranian Americans who think he is going to be the future face of Iran. And he has claimed he's not interested in ruling as a king, but that he will oversee a process of democratization. I'll just leave that there. Then there's other factions, including those aligned with the Mojahedin Khalq, which is called the MEK, which was a Marxist Islamist group that the United States had listed as a terrorist group until they lobbied to get themselves removed from it. And they also have a very strong presence on Capitol Hill in the United States. They do not have any legitimacy among most Iranians because they used violence against Iranians inside Iran. And they also sided with Saddam Hussein against the Iranians during the Iran-Iraq War. Yet they are very powerful on the Hill. These are big lobbyists. I have friends on the Hill who will call me and say, there's this other organization that just came to talk to us. Who are they? And I'll do a 5-minute Google search and I'll figure out they're affiliated with the MEK. Again, a group that has very little legitimacy inside Iran. And then you have people who are critical of the Iranian government. They want to see some transition, whether it is through, not through external. I want to be clear. They do not want external change, but they do want some change of government. But at the same time, don't want to see Iran turn into Syria. They do not want it to happen through civil war or violence. And then there's a group that are very strongly in support of the Iranian government. And that group often in the Western discourse gets completely ignored, as if they don't exist. And of course, there are people both inside Iran and outside Iran who do support the government. They may not, that doesn't mean they give them a blank check on everything that they do, but they believe that the government has generally kept Iran safe. They've kept it stable. They've been able to stand up against external aggression and also any kind of internal disintegration. So all these different groups are competing with one another to claim that they speak on behalf of all the Iranian people. And what's disturbing about Reza Pahlavi is that he is claiming that he has the majority of Iranians behind him. And that's not what we're seeing through our own networks. But he has the ear of the Israelis. He has the ear of Western media, unfortunately.
Professor Mohammad Marandi, who's in Tehran, he often points out on the issue, of the government's popularity, or their base of support, which is very big. He points out that when Trump killed Qasem Soleimani, there were crowds of millions of people out there, showing. And his argument is that that right there shows you that there's a strong level of support internally, which totally gets ignored here in the West. What percentage that is, I have no idea, but it just shows that it exists and it's deliberately ignored. Since we're talking earlier about the New York Times, and we were sort of acknowledging that they did some accurate journalism for once, and a headline about Israel killing civilians in Iran. Of course, they can't make one step forward without continuing to take many steps backwards. So I want to read something that also appeared in the New York Times just this week. One person who sees little similarity between the run-up to the Iraq War and now is David Petraeus, the general who commanded American forces in Iraq and Afghanistan and led the 101st Airborne Division in the initial invasion in Baghdad. Petraeus says, this is clearly the potential run-up to military action, but it's not an invasion of a country. And then he adds this, Petraeus adds this, Trump, he said, should deliver an ultimatum to the supreme leader of Iran and order him to agree to the complete dismantlement of his nuclear program or face, quote, the complete destruction of your country and your regime and your people, unquote. If the supreme leader rejects the ultimatum, Petraeus said, that improves our legitimacy, and then reluctantly we blow them to smithereens. So basically, the New York Times is comfortable, and David Petraeus is comfortable advocating, broadcasting a call for mass murder of Iranians if they don't bow to Trump's demands. And the only caveat is that Petraeus says this will be done reluctantly.
This is a person that makes the circuits, so to speak. General Petraeus, who was forced to resign because of his own personal scandal, has been making a career as the reasonable voice in the national security circles for years, even though he was responsible in part with lying about how bad things were going for the US military in Afghanistan, something that was then later revealed actually in the New York Times, right? So let's first look at the credibility of the person that's speaking, okay? And then secondly, he seems to be contradicting himself in the same instance that he's saying, we can be very reasonable, but then we're going to wipe Iran away. And those are not at all, there's no pushback in the analysis that surrounds his quote. And that's where that you see this at every level in so many pieces where someone says something outlandishly violent, genocidal, and there's no correction in the analysis or even a counterpoint to it. To cite some other expert who pushes back against that. And to point out the imbalances of the media coverage, every time they point out something that the Iranian government says, they have to balance it with an Israeli talking point, but never in the other direction. So we are always led to believe that the Israeli point of view is the standard. That is the rational point of view, and that is the truth. And anything that the Iranian government says needs to be clarified. So already subconsciously, when you're reading this, you're thinking, okay, I can't trust what the Iranian government is saying, even though they're being very cautious in certain things. For example, they have not changed their civilian death numbers since Sunday from 224, even though we know those numbers have gone higher. They want to make sure they verify those numbers because they know it will be weaponized. They know that it will be twisted if they get that number wrong.
Can you talk about the role of the nuclear deal that Obama got, that Trump tore up, that Biden did not reintroduce, and whether you think this would have had an effect on what we're seeing today had Biden reintroduced it? Yeah.
Absolutely. The JCPOA was working. And I interview people who are deep in the national security apparatus, and they all admit that. It was working. It was keeping Iran's enrichment levels far below weapons capability. Since Trump unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018, Iran jumped up to 60% enrichment, which is getting far beyond what civilian use is, right? I'm not saying that they were developing a weapon, but they went beyond what is normally considered civilian. So the JCPOA was working. And that is what the intelligence assessments were saying at the time. And even now, the intelligence assessments are saying Iran is not developing a nuclear weapon, right? Tulsi Gabbard went on record and said they are not developing a nuclear weapon. And that gave Trump the green light that he needed to continue to negotiate. Now, meanwhile, you brought up Biden. Biden had 4 years to go back to the JCPOA, but he made it very clear that he was not interested. It was not a priority. Again, I talked to people who were inside the US government, and they were saying, this is a mistake. We need to get Iran back into an agreement where there is some verification. Instead, they thought it's not worth the time. It's not worth it. And they made it a very low priority. And then that put Iran in a position where they could not trust the U.S. anymore.
I see Israel and the U.S. as the only aggressors here. For me, like, full fault is on them. I just have to clarify that before I ask this question. But I'm wondering, in responding to the U.S. and Israel, do you think any tactical mistakes by the Iranian government in how they handled joint U.S.-Israeli aggression?
I mean, this is a complicated question because I do think, depending on which Iranian you're speaking to, they're going to say it in different ways. But I generally do not think civilians should be targeted. And I think that is something that we can all stand by. But I'm obviously wrong in this. Again, Israel was the initial aggressor, and Iran has a right to self-defense. For someone like me, I don't think civilians should be hit. And unfortunately, we know that a lot of the people that are dying in Israel are Palestinians who are not being given shelters by the Israeli state. And I feel like that's a story that's also being glossed over, unfortunately.
Part about it is on Israel for using civilians as human shields by building their military infrastructure, in civilian areas. But my question was actually, it was not even about like the current fighting, but in terms of in the lead up to all of this, like, in terms of Iran putting itself in the best position. I wonder if you see like before the Israeli aggression began, if you see, if any, and fair enough if not, because again, it's Israel and the U.S. that have been the aggressors, if you see any tactical errors.
I think they honestly played it as best as they could because I think they were giving Steve Witkoff, who was the negotiator, the benefit of the doubt multiple times, even though publicly Trump would backpedal the U.S. position and say, you know what, we're actually going to demand that Iran be at 0% nuclear enrichment. And that's bad faith negotiating. Now, maybe that's what they were saying publicly because, again, that's a negotiation tactic. But if I were the Iranians, that's that's bad faith, right? Because that's not what the JCPOA was even demanding. The JCPOA did not even demand 0% enrichment. They said you can do enough that's for civilian use, highly, inspected and regulated. Now, where Iran could possibly have done more is to have done some good faith measures in terms of inviting the IAEA to do more inspections in the run-up. But again, it's really hard to talk about in this huge imbalance of power where Iran could have done it differently.
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to suggest that I had any answers. I'm just curious if you had any thoughts. And on the problem with on the IAEA, the problem there is, can you fully trust them, especially in light of leaks from Iran, where they claim or they allege that the IAEA was basically in collusion in part with the West and with Israel. And certainly they put out a report that the U.S. and Israel used to push their warmongering, only for the IAEA chief Grossi to sort of like retract that and say, actually, we had no evidence that Iran was working towards nuclear weapons. But after the damage was done, after Israel had already started bombing Iran. And so I just find the question curious. It's like, when you're in that position, when you're under the gun from the world's top hegemon and their proxy Israel, just, is there anything you can do better to get out of that situation? But I recognize, of course, that Iran was in an impossible situation.
Yeah, I mean, and they offered multiple times to return to the negotiating table, to return to the JCPOA, and those offers kept being sidelined or ignored. And at some point, Iran also has politics, right? Like, it also has its own domestic constituency. There's only so much you can keep doing those things and not also get backlash from some of your own supporters.
Like, talk to us about that. I mean, like, talk about the different political considerations that Iran has to weigh in dealing with the West after being betrayed so many times by the West, and not just with Trump and the Iran deal, but over a long legacy of the 1953 coup that overthrew Mossadegh, the U.S. supporting Saddam Hussein, the shooting down of a civilian jetliner, the sanctions that have been causing a lot of suffering inside Iran. And so, accordingly, the political difficulties that the government has in trying to reach a new deal with the West.
That's right. I mean, Iran is dealing with a U.S. that has been hostile to it well before the Islamic Republic. And this is something that a lot of Americans forget because they think history starts whenever they want it to start, which is, for many Americans, U.S.-Iran relations started in 1979 with the hostage crisis. And they conveniently ignore 1953, as you mentioned, where the U.S. supported the British intelligence in overthrowing Mossadegh. But that's something that Iranians do not forget. It lives on in our historical memory. And then, like you said, the U.S. backed Saddam Hussein in the bloodiest land war and longest land war of the 20th century, which lasted 8 years between Iran and Iraq. So many civilians died on both sides, so many soldiers. All three of my uncles fought in that war and are still suffering from the PTSD of that war, right? So there's so many veterans that are disabled in Iran because of that war. And I think one of the things that a lot of Iranians feel frustrated about is still to this day, there has been no recognition of the violence that was inflicted on them. I took a group of Americans to Iran in 2004, and that was a message that repeatedly ordinary Iranians were telling the Americans. This was their first time that they got to talk to Americans face to face. And they were saying, no one has acknowledged how much we suffered during that war, and you armed our enemy. And even with that, so many Iranian people still don't see the US as an enemy. And that's incredible to me, as a direct enemy. They still are willing and want there to be a more open Iran that has better relations with the US.
I want to return to this question of what people on the ground are saying and your friends and family who are still there. But before we do that, and I should offer a trigger warning, I wanted you to react to a clip of Tucker Carlson talking to the great Ted Cruz of Texas.
How many people live in Iran, by the way?
I don't know the population.
At all?
No, I don't know the population.
You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple?
How many people live in Iran?
92 million.
Okay. Yeah.
How could you not know that?
I don't sit around memorizing population tables.
Well, it's kind of relevant because you're calling for the overthrow of the government.
Why is it relevant whether it's,
because
it's 90 million or 80 million or 100 million? Why is that relevant?
Because if you don't know anything about the country...
I didn't say I don't know anything about
Okay, what's the ethnic mix of Iran?
They are Persians and
What percent?
predominantly Shia. Okay, this is
no,
cute.
it's not
Okay.
even... You don't know anything about Iran. So
okay,
actually,
I am not the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran.
You're a
who
senator
says,
who's calling for the
you're
overthrow of the government.
You're the one who
don't know
claims
anything about the country.
No, you don't know anything about the country. You're the one who claims they're not trying to murder Donald Trump. You're the
I'm
one
not saying that.
who can't figure out
I'm
if it was a good idea to kill General Soleimani, and you said it was bad.
You don't believe they're trying to murder Trump.
Yes, I do.
Because you're not calling for military strikes against them in retaliation. And if you really believe
we're
that...
carrying out military strikes today.
You said Israel was.
Right, with our help. I said we. Israel is leading them, but we're supporting them.
Well, you're breaking news here because the U.S. government last night denied, the National Security Council spokesman Alex Pfeiffer denied on behalf of Trump that we were acting on Israel's behalf in any offensive capacity.
No, we're not bombing them. Israel's bombing them.
You just said we were.
We are supporting
This is
Israel.
high stakes. You're a senator. If you're saying the United States government is at war with Iran right now, people are listening.
Okay.
Did some anti-war activists put on a Ted Cruz mask and pretend to be Ted Cruz so it would make it sound like regime change was the worst idea, being championed by total ignoramuses, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, whenever I present my research to people in Washington, they tell me, you're being so unfair about these Iran experts and about the state of Iran, about the Iran debate. And then you actually ask them questions about Iran, and they are so ignorant about this country that they themselves repeatedly say is our number one state enemy in the region, right? So you're saying that this is your number one enemy and you don't know basic facts. I went to so many events where they would mix up the supreme leader of today with the founder of the Islamic Republic, Khomeini and Khamenei. Now, granted, they're very close names, but you're claiming to be an expert on this country.
Yeah, you should
master
that.
And you cannot tell the difference between these two figures, right? Some basics are embarrassing. They don't know that Iran is a multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic country. Or if they do, they oversimplify that to the point of saying, all Iranian Arabs hate the regime and all Iranian Kurds hate the regime. In fact, those are, again, very oversimplified generalizations. There is ethnic tensions. There are groups that have been mistreated by the Islamic Republic, of course. The Baluch, the Kurds, the Arabs, they all have legitimate grievances. But to say that they are separatists or that they want to divide up the country into pieces, as the Jerusalem Post editorial recently just said, that is such an overstatement of what is actually happening inside of Iran. So unfortunately, the Ted Cruz interview proves my thesis, which is that despite their obsession with Iran, despite the fact that they have been claiming that this is an existential threat, not only to Israel, but to the United States, they repeatedly show their ignorance about this very country.
I guess on a related note, you're an antidote to that. So tell us what you know of, besides your research on a more personal level. What are you hearing from the people you know in Iran right now?
Yeah, so, first of all, how we're gathering information right now is in itself very telling. So the internet goes out and we don't hear from people that we love. I haven't heard from my uncle in close to 48 hours. He lives in downtown Tehran near a government building. So we are terrified that he will be collateral damage in that. My grandmother, who is wheelchair bound, had to be taken by my cousin to a nearby village, not far enough that they are completely away from the violence, but they've at least taken her out of her home. There are so many others that we are not able to get in contact with. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's this terrifying moment where it'll be radio silence for a period of time, and then they get a minute of internet and they send us, we're alive. We're not going to waste time. We're alive. We're okay. And then what we do is we calibrate amongst ourselves. So I will then text all my friends in the US and Europe and say, have you guys heard from any of your relatives in X neighborhood or Y neighborhood? And then we compare. Then we go on social media to see if there's been any announcement of the next neighborhood they're going to attack. Because I don't know if you know this, but the IDF in advance will give a map of Tehran and say, today we're going to attack District 18, for example.
Which makes them the most moral army in the world, according to their defender.
Absolutely. And meanwhile, that's 1 million people potentially live in that district. And that example that I gave is a very poor area of Tehran. Most of those people don't own cars and can probably never leave Tehran because they have nowhere to go. So then we get that information and we calibrate it. And then the last possible place we go to is the mainstream media to see essentially what the Israelis have to say. Because that's how we gauge where the truth is. We start with our networks and then we work backwards. And what we're hearing is, my cousin, I'm not going to mince words. My cousins are very critical of the Islamic Republic. They have a lot of grievances, but they right now are saying they are the only ones who are protecting us from dying. Right. So whoever is arguing that this is somehow going to bring regime change from within, how can people who are being bombed, who are terrified, who are seeing political prisoners or just prisoners in general, who have no chance of escaping, how can that possibly lead to a social movement from within? And the answer is that they cannot, because that's not actually Israel's goal. Right. Israel's goal is not actually to foment a social movement from within, because if they did, they would not be attacking civilian infrastructure. They would not be bombing neighborhoods full of people who have nothing to do with the nuclear program, right? So their goal is regime instability. And that's the scary part. And I think a lot of people inside Iran are coming to grips with that in real time.
And what would the goal of regime instability ultimately be?
To just keep Iran off the map in terms of, being in opposition to Israel's larger hegemonic goals in the region. I don't think a democratic, stable Iran that is not the Islamic Republic would be pro-Israel. Honestly, I think when you look at national interests, I think any government would pursue a nuclear program because it is in their national interests to do so. And this is something that Israel does not want. They do not want a stable, cohesive, strong Iran, regardless of which government is in power.
We're going to wrap it there. Negar
so
Razavi, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
thank you so
great.
much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. That was such a great interview with Negar Razavi, and that was also such a great interview right before with Sina Toossi. And because voices like Negar's and Sina's are so uncommon on mainstream media platforms and to be heard in legacy media, we wanted to make sure that everyone had access to it. So we're not paywalling any parts of those interviews. But of course, loyal subscribers do get the wonderful Thursday Throwdown segment, which is your midweek dose of media madness. And of course, there are tons of other episodes that you do have bonus content for, and we will get back to doing that next week.
Thanks so much for tuning into and supporting Useful Idiots. Our website is always usefulidiotspodcast.com. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For extended episodes, bonus content, and our weekly Thursday Throwdown episode, please subscribe at usefulidiotspodcast.com. Support the show for free by subscribing on YouTube, Rumble, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review. You can also follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod. Thanks for supporting independent media. We'll see you next time.